Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to Humanity Rising on this 5th day of January as we commence our program for the new year of 2022. I trust everyone had a warm and heartful holiday. Those of us in the north for the winter, the commencement of winter, and those in the south for the commencement of summer. But it's my hope that wherever you are in the 130 plus countries that we broadcast to on Humanity Rising, you've had a time with your family, you've had a time with the earth, you've had a time with community, you've had time with yourself just to take stock and to be grateful that we're all alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. I've been reflecting on sort of where we are as a planet, where we are as a human community. We spent a lot of time last year in 2021 looking at the issue of climate. As you all know, the report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said that we are in unprecedented territory, which the Secretary General said means code red for humanity. And we spent 12 days actually during the Conference of Parties in Glasgow between the 1st and 12th of November, really just looking at the climate crisis, but also the extraordinary opportunity for human renewal and regeneration of our ecology. We also, as we closed out the year, and we are mindful that tomorrow is January 6th, we're in an era of what I would call multiple code reds as we start 2022. And one of the code reds is around democracy, probably most specifically in the United States, as there's a very concerted effort to erode the democratic institutions and to consolidate essentially an authoritarian, totalitarian way of governance. We'll be talking about that tomorrow. But all over the world, democracy is under an orchestrated assault. And as was pointed out in a beautiful article by Anne Applebaum in The Atlantic, the cover story was the bad guys are winning. Just like climate is spinning out of control, democracy is really under assault in very, very concerning ways. And I would say we're in a code red for democracy. We're also in a code red around COVID. Just think about it for a moment. We've been in this pandemic since the World Health Organization called it a pandemic on March 11th, 2020, and we're closing in on 2 years. And the vaccines that our governments and the pharmaceutical industry are telling us we need to have aren't working. The countries with the highest vaccination rates are the highest COVID rates around the world right now. And there are reasons for this. And we need to understand them. One of the books that came out over the last couple of months is Robert F. Kennedy's seminal work called The Real Anthony Fauci, where he lays out how the pharmaceutical industries and the agencies of the US government, the World Health Organization, are orchestrating a regime that's in threat to not only public health, but also to democracy, as an example of what Naomi Klein calls disaster capitalism. So we need to understand that. And so we'll be developing a whole program in just a little bit on Humanity Rising as we cover these deep issues that are really challenging human survivability, particularly in terms of climate, as the ecology of the planet spins more and more out of control, and in the face of which our governments are less and less capable of ensuring stability. So the meta theme for Humanity Rising, everyone, as we embark on 2022, an absolutely seminal, critical year at every level, is about empowerment. How do we empower ourselves with, first of all, understanding the truth about what's going on? Because it's the truth that sets us free. But we need to dig beneath the media and Facebook and the conventional instrumentalities through which the governing elites shape our thoughts and really find out what's really happening. So the 2022 for Humanity Rising is going to be on how we empower ourselves to both know and also then to take the kind of actions that can activate our human potential, and to do so in community. From the very beginning, when we launched on the 22nd of May, 2020, and developed this global community that has been so inspiring and so dynamic, I would say, and out of which has come so many programs and coalitions, including the Global Regeneration Corps and the new Masters in Regenerative Action and many programs that we've collaborated together to develop. Radical collaboration so that our individual empowerment is done always in community, because we're in a moment in history where the only way any of us are going to make it through is to hold hands. So the community framework for the kind of truth saying, speaking truth to power, and in empowering ourselves so that we take care of ourselves. Because one of the great lessons of COVID is the access from the outside in aren't working. So how do we develop our capacities for renewal from the inside out by activating those capacities that we have access to, but we seldom develop, that will bring wholeness and well-being and abundance and health in alignment with the earth. And that is the final point that I want to make as we begin 2022. Biomimicry, everything that we do needs to be shaped by the laws and the processes, the verities, the truths that we see emanating from the earth. We're the children of the earth. And if there's one thing we've done that have contributed to the present predicament is we've forgotten our connection. So the meta theme for Humanity Rising will be on empowerment, beyond truth, beyond community, and beyond earth, citizenship, because that's in the end what empowers us all. So today we're going to empower ourselves by looking at human origins, and I will say a little bit more about that in a moment. But I want to thank everyone for joining. It is so good to be here. I've waited since the 10th of December when we paused for the holidays to get back with you. I love you all so dearly and feel so inspired and so animated, I would say, animated every time we have one of these sessions. And so from the bottom of my heart, I want to just thank everyone for your support and your contribution and your faith and your deep, deep belief that at this critical moment, humanity can rise. So let us begin to do that by just taking a moment to center ourselves in our bodies. We are bodies, we're earth, we're dust, we're clay. And let us center our attention on our hearts just for a minute and listen to our heartbeats in a spirit of gratitude and deep thanksgiving that we're fortunate enough, we are favored enough to be alive, to make a difference at this critical moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. So good to be with all of you today. I want to commence our program by saying that probably the deepest and most important way that we can begin the process of truly empowering ourselves is not starting with 2022, not even starting with modernity, not even starting with written history and civilization, but by being truly radical. And radical means to go back to one's roots. And in this case, to go back to the origins of the human species. Because like so much of what we're hearing, whether it's on economics or science or physics, COVID, contemporary affairs, what we hear in the news is not what's actually happening. And it's always good to, when you think about anything that you're hearing from the conventional sources of information, to make the operative assumption that that's the equivalent to the earth being flat. And that actually it's round. And part of our challenge in terms of our empowerment is to really find out how round everything truly is. But you have to break through the conventional wisdom that is completely flat. Like Ken Wilber says, we're in a flatland world. And that's the chief reason, as Plato said in his allegory of the cave, we just see the flickers of the shadows on the back of the cave. But we have to stand up, go to the front of the cave, and see the sun. And there's no one that does this better, particularly on human origins and the interface between human origins and human potential, than Greg Braden. You all know him, I'm sure. He's the author of, I think, a dozen best-selling books that have been translated into dozens of languages, I think 40 plus languages around the world. He's a geologist by training, a scientist who worked for many, many years in problem solving in major corporations, including Cisco. He has developed programming, his own research to show the intelligent functionality of the human genome. He's researched very, very deeply in a pioneering way some of the facts about human origins that, because they're not comfortably fitted in current evolutionary theory, have been repressed. But we're in those moments, we're in that moment rather, where understanding the roundness, the actual truth of where we came from, if we can seize that truth, everything else opens up to us in a way that will surprise us and empower us and lead us to deeper insight. So, Greg, I want to welcome you to Humanity Rising. We wanted to start 2022 with Greg Braden because I wanted somebody who's been through the journey of truth finding in a way that can empower us. And the best place to start is on human origins. But I want to just get your sense as we start, Greg, on how you're feeling about sort of the world as we embark on 2022. What issues are alive for you? What challenges do you think we should be attending to with particular interest? I've outlined a few, but there are many, many more. So let's begin our conversation today with how you're viewing 2022 as we embark on our new year.
Well, Jim, first of all, thank you so much for the warm introduction. I'm getting a signal that says my signal is weak. We had an internet drop and I'm on a satellite. So there's going to be a little delay, and I apologize in advance if I'm speaking over any of your sentences. Am I coming through okay to you right now?
So far, so far.
All right, good. Jim, it's so good to be with you on this first week of 2022 in our community here. And I love that introduction, and I love the way you talk about finding out how round the world really is. I my feelings about where we are right now. I'm excited. I'm an optimist by nature, and I'm also a realist. Realistically, we're in it, and the only way out of it is to go through it. And my hope and my prayer, my dream is that by accessing the deepest truths of our existence, Jim, that we will find the way in a healthy way, not just to survive, but to thrive and build this new world that we all know is possible. So I'm excited because the systems that are unsustainable are the only things that are breaking down. And I think it's important for us to recognize that. If we don't know that we're in this time of change, it looks like the world is falling apart for no apparent reason, just coming apart at the seams, and that can be very frightening. But when we step back and look at the big picture, and what we find, and you mentioned I am an earth scientist, I'm a geologist by degree, but I have a strong background in the life sciences, molecular biology, molecular chemistry, cellular biology, as well as math, physics, computer science, and cosmology, and I'm an amateur archaeologist. So these are all the boxes that we have broken our world into so that we can study them comfortably through academia. But the reality is that reality doesn't know about those boxes. So they all fit together beautifully. And they have given me the opportunity as a scientist to stay plugged in, a multidisciplinary scientist, to stay plugged into the scientific world. And I have to tell you, what the scientists, the real scientists, not the pop scientists, but the real scientists behind the scenes, what they're saying to one another and what they're writing in their technical papers that very few people get to read is very different from what we're being led to believe in the mainstream. And this is across the board. This has to do with everything that all the code reds that you've just mentioned. So for me, as a systems thinker, I was a senior computer systems designer in the defense industry and the aerospace industry, space exploration during the Cold War years. So I tend to think as a systems thinker. And one of the things that I have seen for a very long time is that we're living this convergence of cycles that are rarely acknowledged in the mainstream. Now, our indigenous ancestors knew about this convergence for a very long time, and they've told us that we could expect tremendous change in the era that we're in right now. And when I look at the accuracy of what they told us to expect, I'm in awe of how they could know that. That's a different program. That's a whole different program. But we are living the convergence of cycles. Climate cycles are natural rhythms that would happen even if humans were not on Earth. We are obviously contributing to them. But by denying their existence, we have become vulnerable and allowed suffering, in my opinion, that is unnecessary. We could have been ready for these climate cycles, and we have ways of mitigating the ways that we contribute to those cycles. And I'm happy to talk about those. But climate, in and of itself, that's enough to change the world. But we're also in the midst of an economic cycle. And when people hear about economics, they think about money. And it can be, but I have studied with indigenous traditions for years where they had beautiful economies that had no money. So economies are more about people being able to access the vital goods and resources that they need: food, energy, water, medicine, communication, security, all those kinds of things. And we're in an economic crisis that was known and predicted because it is a rhythmic, it is a cyclic process. In addition to that, I had the opportunity to speak at the UN a couple of years ago, and I shared with them what I'm sharing now. And the next part of this, they were surprised to hear, is that we are in a cycle of human conflict. And they said, well, what do you mean by that? Doesn't conflict just happen spontaneously? And I said, well, it may. But we also know that there are rhythms and cycles to human conflicts. There's 56-year conflict cycles, 17.7-year conflict cycles. And this is where the science gets really interesting, Jim, because the cycles are linked to magnetic fields and fluctuations of those fields relating to the sun and the earth, human heart rhythms, human blood pressure. And the bottom line is that when the magnetics are weak, we are less willing to cooperate and more aggressive. And when the magnetic fields are strong, it's the reverse of that. And we happen to be, the year 2020 marked the depth of the weakest magnetic field. So we are vulnerable. Now, I want to be very clear. We're not slaves to the cycles. When we have the consciousness to recognize them, they can also open the door to the greatest opportunities for clear communication and extending the olive branch, when we're having the conflicts. And I also want to say the greatest opportunities of peace, the ends of the great wars have all happened in the times that we're in right now. So any of those, and each of those actually could be a conversation unto itself, but all of them are converging right now. And that convergence is a trigger for the kinds of things that we're seeing. So knowing that, I'm excited because the only things breaking down are the systems that are unsustainable. The things that are good and true remain good and true. And it invites us to really consider the values, Jim. What do we value as individuals, as families, as communities, and societies? Because there's a world emerging, but it's not here yet, because we're building it right now. And this is what we're going to do today. We're building it based upon the way we've been taught to think about ourselves, our story. Our story changed, but that change is not being shared in the mainstream. So that's a long answer to a short question, and this is what I'd like to do, is just lay the foundation to all of that today.
Well, thank you, Greg. I think there are a number of programs, and just so everybody knows, we're in conversation about doing a series of programs with Greg, because his intelligence is so dimensionalized and his research and awareness is so multidisciplinary that one thread leads to others in a beautiful tapestry of knowledge and information that we all need to have as we take in what he's saying, that a world is dying that is no longer sustainable, but a world is being birthed, and that's us. That's us. We don't have the institutions yet of the world that is dying, but we have the capacities and the potential, and that's what we want to explore today. And the way we wanted to start was on human origins, because what we think about how we came to where we are actually isn't the case. And so, Greg, why don't we focus on human origins? And I know you have some PowerPoint slides and so forth, but speak to us just on this one specific matter, and then after your presentation, we'll broaden it. But we'll also have subsequent programs where we'll go into more detail on economics and science and archaeology and various other domains.
It sounds exciting, Jim. I'm looking forward to that. And, we live our lives based upon the way we've been taught to think. about ourselves. And I know that our community knows that, but I don't know that our community has really considered how deeply this impacts every moment of our lives. It's all about what we call our story. Our story, we all have stories. And our story comes from our family, the way our family teaches us to think about ourselves, our community, certainly, our society. It comes from universities, from education. It comes from religion. It comes from the nation that we live in. Each nation asks its citizens to embrace a story about who they are and where they've come from. It comes from the way we think about our relationship to the universe, to cosmology, to God. And when we begin to put all of this together, what we see, Jim, is that new discoveries based upon rock solid science. These are discoveries that are peer-reviewed science. So what I'm going to share with you, I want to emphasize this. It's not my theory. It's not my hypothesis. I am sharing discoveries that simply are not being shared in the mainstream. Mainstream classrooms, mainstream textbooks, mainstream documentaries even are being limited in what they can share. And one of the first questions that people ask is, if this new information's out there, why isn't it being shared? And the quick answer is ego, habit, power, and money. When I was in school in the 1950s, early 1960s, I was told a story about who I am and how I came to be in this world as I am. And that story is largely the same story that's being taught to our young people today, even though the information no longer supports it. So the bottom line here is we are not what we have been told, and we're much, much more than we've ever imagined. And the better we know ourselves, Jim, the better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are to make healthy choices as we build the new world. The better we know ourselves, the less we fear the change in the familiar world. And perhaps most importantly, the better we know ourselves, the less we fear our own power. And this is where we are today. We're all being invited to step in to an extraordinary potential that we are rarely taught is true, although this is the potential in science fiction and in popular media that people are magnetically drawn to. And I think the reason is because it speaks to an intuitive knowing that there's something inside of us that is awakening. So, young people are drawn to movies like The Avengers, and Harry Potter and things like that. And we've been drawn as adults to movies like The Matrix, telling us there's a world we can't see that influences the world we can see, or Avatar, telling us how deeply connected we are and how vital the natural world is. So all of this is part of our story. So, Jim, I'm going to begin at the beginning, if that's okay with you, and let me lay out a conversation. And then there's one specific piece I want to illustrate through, I do have a little presentation, it's brief. But I want to honor our community with the science is simple, and I want to be very clear about this. Science is simple, nature is simple, until we make it complex. So we can make it complex with big words and algorithms and equations, and that's why a lot of people don't know about these things. But the principles are so simple. So I'm going to begin. When I was in school, 50s, 60s, I was taught Darwin's theory of evolution. And I want to be very clear about this. As a geologist, evolution is a fact. I am not a denier in evolution. I've seen it in the fossil record for plants, animals, insects. The problem is that evolution, that theory breaks down when it comes to us. And it always has. It was introduced by Charles Darwin, 1859. And I also want to be very clear, I'm not anti-Darwin. Darwin could not have possibly known in his day what we now understand in ours. And he also said, Darwin was very clear, he said he was putting forward a theory to move us away from religion as the understanding of our origin. But he said, as a scientist, the first time the data doesn't support my story, we have to go with a new story. So Darwin expected his theory to be overturned. It's modern academia and corporations and pharmaceutical companies and powers at large that are fighting. And there is a battle There is a battle playing out for the human story because we are so much more than we've been led to believe. And that means that we are powerful beings that may empower ourselves. So when we talk about evolution, what people typically think of, there is a classic tree of evolution where you see modern humans at the top linked to other less evolved forms of life. When you look closely at those trees, what you'll see is there is a broken line that connects us, we modern humans, with those ancestors, like Neanderthal, for example, or Australopithecus, or Lucy from, I remember when I was a kid, National Geographic, Lewis Leakey, Olduvai Gorge. I was hanging on every issue because it was so fascinating. But if you look closely, that broken line says that the evidence is inferred or speculative, is what that broken line means. We have yet to find any physical evidence that links us directly to those forms of life, hence the missing link that scientists are searching for. And there are intermediate, and there are a lot of biologists I've talked to that have a problem with what I'm saying, but this is the science. If you go into the Smithsonian, for example, and you look at the chart, there's not a solid line. They will say these are inferred or speculative relationships. We believe they exist, and we're still looking for the evidence. My sense is after 150 plus years with the best tools, the greatest sums of money and endowments, the greatest minds in the world, if we were on the right track, we would be closer. But the fact is that it is not supported by physical evidence. There's a break. Something mysterious happened as we emerged 200,000 years ago. So this is the physical evidence. So the question then becomes, what could have happened? Now, scientists are in total agreement in terms of when we appeared on this planet. And it is the date I just mentioned, approximately 200,000 years BP, before present. The question is, how did it happen? And this is where it gets really interesting. I'm going to go ahead and share, if I still have permission, I'm going to share.
Please.
Let me share my, yeah. Okay, are you seeing a slide, and are you still seeing the little Greg in the box in the corner?
Yep.
All right. What I'm going to say sounds like science fiction, and it was until just a few years ago. There was a movie that came out called Jurassic Park. And in Jurassic Park, scientists were able to extract the DNA from fossilized remains of ancient forms of life. In the movie, they reconstituted the DNA and they brought the life to life. They brought the dinosaurs back into the world, and that was the whole Jurassic Park series. To the best of my knowledge, we haven't gone quite that far, but here's where we are. We now have the ability to extract DNA from the bone marrow of the fossilized remains of beings that we used to believe were our ancestors. And I wanted to show you this. If people are asking, what does fossilized DNA look like? There it is right there on your screen. This is an example, an actual, it's called a photomicrograph of the fossilized DNA coming out of some of these primitive forms of life. Now, what this means, if we can pull their DNA, it means that we can compare their genome to our genome. And what we now know is that there is not enough overlap in the genome to support that we have evolved from Neanderthal, for example. We now know that we shared the earth with Neanderthal. We walked the earth with Neanderthal. Scientists say we probably had, Neanderthal boyfriends and girlfriends. We interbred with Neanderthal. And there are places in the world today where people will find Neanderthal DNA in their genome, but that doesn't mean that we descended from them. If we shared the earth with them, we could not have descended from them. So we know who we are not. We did not descend from Neanderthal. We didn't descend from some of these other forms of life that you see on the evolutionary tree. And so it opens the door to the question, well, then who are we and where did we come from? Well, it comes down to a series of mysterious genetic mutations that cannot be explained through evolution. And I've chosen one to really emphasize here today. And I also want to emphasize this is not the only one, but this is what's called the smoking gun. Because what I'm going to share with you, excuse me, what I'm going to share cannot happen. It cannot happen through an evolutionary process. So when we talk about chromosomes, human chromosome number 2 is the mysterious chromosome that we're going to talk about right now. Some people are familiar with it, some are not. It's the second largest chromosome in the nucleus of every cell in your body. It takes up about 8% of the DNA. That's a lot. This chromosome is responsible for the enlarged brain that we emerged with 200,000 years ago. We showed up with a brain about 50% larger than our nearest primate relative. 76% of our neocortex is attributed to this chromosome that we're going to talk about. The reason that's important is because our our human capacities, the things that we cherish as humans, are a result of this chromosome. Our ability to emote the way that we do, our ability to have sympathy, empathy, compassion, and this is key, our ability to self-regulate our biology. We're the only form of life known today. I'm going to make this statement, and it will make more sense today, and when we do part 2, Jim, we're going to tie into this as well. We're the only form of life that has the ability to self-regulate our biology at will on demand. Now, other forms of life may do it instinctually in response to their physical environment. They have very little control over it. But we're the only form of life that can awaken deep states of intuition on demand, that can enhance our immune system on demand. Well, who doesn't want a stronger immune system right now? We have the ability to do this on demand, to awaken longevity enzymes on demand, to create resilience to change on demand, super memory, super cognition, super recall, and much more. So the point is, all of this is possible because of what happened in this chromosome. So I just want people to see exactly what we're talking about. On the right-hand side of the screen, what you see in green, that neocortex, almost 80% of that neocortex is the result of the gene, and I didn't mention it, I don't want to get too technical. It's called gene TBR number 1, and it is only one of about 1,200 genes in chromosome 2. So we're only talking about even one gene, and there are more that we could talk about. So I think you can see that chromosome number 2, human chromosome number 2, is very important to us. It is what gives us this capacity, this extraordinary capacity for our humanness. So the big question is, where did it come from? If it is not the result of evolutionary processes, then how did we come to acquire this extraordinary set of information, this code? Well, scientists have answered this, and it's a little bit of a technical answer. So I just want you to see that, again, this is not my theory. This is Proceedings, National Academy of Sciences. The volume is called Genetics. They had a 2-week conference in terms of where chromosome 2 came from. And I love this, Jim, because, when a scientist makes a discovery and they want full credit and they're really proud of it, generally in the paper they will say, I found this, or I conclude that this is possible, or I conclude this is what's happened. What they're saying is so radical, and I love that you use that term in introducing our program today. What they say is so radical that they kind of wanted to spread the implications around. So instead of I conclude, they say we. We conclude that human chromosome number 2 is the relic of an ancient DNA fusion of 2 ancestral chromosomes. That is an earthquake in the realm of human biology, because the fusion that happened is not your everyday run-of-the-mill fusion. And that's what I want to go into a little detail for this. I want people to see. It is called a telomere to telomere fusion, And I'm going to show graphically exactly what that means. But first, I just want you to see it. So what you're seeing on the screen right now, this is a rare image, and I worked hard to get this so we could show it today. This is, everyone watching, this is your chromosome number 2. It's a long chromosome, and if you look in the middle, can you see that little pinch point? And I'm going to highlight it for you right there. That is the big deal. That is the earth shaker right there. That is the point where these two chromosomes are fused in a way that cannot happen through evolutionary processes. That gives us what we are today. And not only, and we could go so deep into this, not only are these two chromosomes fused, but after they were fused, there were genes that were removed, genes that were added, genes that were silenced or deregulated to stabilize this fusion. And it makes perfect sense. So think about this. If there were two pre-existing genes that were fully intact, fully functional, think of it like two corporations. Think of it like Whole Foods and Amazon. Now, I know those two would never fuse into one corporation. It would just be crazy to do that. But if it happened, Whole Foods has a human resources department. It's got a shipping department. It's got a finances department. And Amazon's got the same thing, shipping, finances, human resources. You fuse them together, and what happens is there's overlap and redundancies in those two companies. So things have to change so you can stabilize the merging of those companies. It's exactly what happened on this chromosome. They were fully intact, two chromosomes. When they became one, the overlap had to be compensated for. So genes were removed, genes were added, genes were silenced, genes were deregulated so that we have sympathy, empathy, compassion, and the ability to self-regulate. Now, what's interesting is this happened, and you can't make this stuff up. Scientists now believe that this happened, I'll just take a wild, intuitive guess, 200,000 years ago, precisely at the time that what are called anatomically modern humans emerged on the earth. We today are called anatomically modern humans. When I was in school in the 50s, we used to be called Cro-Magnon, and that term is no longer used. It's been replaced by AMH, anatomically modern humans. So we appeared at the same time that this fusion happened. Now, let me share why this is a big deal, because I know I've got some really smart people out there, and we've got some life scientists that say, what's the big deal? We see fusions all the time in biology, and it's true, we do, but not like this. So I'm just going to begin at the very beginning here. Here's a transparent chromosome, and you're looking at DNA inside the chromosome. And on the end of each strand of DNA is a little protective series, a genetic series that are called telomeres. You hear about them a lot in terms of anti-aging and things like that. And the purpose of the telomeres is to protect all of the DNA information when the cell divides. It's a trauma. It's a traumatic experience for a cell to divide. And as that cell is being ripped apart, essentially, there are portions of the DNA that will not make it. They won't make that cut. We don't want the portions that don't make it to be vital information interior to the DNA. So we're designed so that if a part of the DNA doesn't make it, it's going to be at the ends on the telomere. The telomeres are going to take the hit. And we're designed to do that. And they will do that cell division after cell division until there is so little of the telomere left that the cell will no longer divide. And we call that senescence, cell senescence, or ultimately cell death. So the telomeres are important, and they are only found at the ends of the chromosome. This is important. So here's a little illustration of, here's two chromosomes. And in biology, as I said, we do know of times where chromosomes break. It can be from drugs, bad drugs. It can be from ultraviolet light. It can be from toxins in the environment, radiation. A lot of things can cause this. But here's what typically happens. Okay, the break, you can see that little white dotted line is the break. So there's where the telomeres, they break at a certain point, and then part of the deleted genetic material, it's dissolved in the body, and the part above the break fuses together. All right, but look at what happens. The telomeres at the ends of those chromosomes are now the telomeres at the top and the bottom of this chromosome. They fuse at the break point. Okay, and I'm going to make a distinction here. Here's a little schematic. What you're seeing on the left side of your screen is two schematic drawings of the ancestral chromosomes, and the telomeres are in blue, and you can see how the telomeres are on the ends of the chromosomes. What happened with us, our chromosome 2, is there wasn't a break where things were fused. We were fused telomere to telomere, so that we actually have telomeres now in the interior of the chromosome, right there. You can see it right there. I've just highlighted it with a red circle. That is what scientists call the smoking gun. Those telomeres shouldn't be in the middle of the chromosome, but they are in the middle now because they used to be on the ends before the fusion happened. So that's what we're looking at right here. So just a quick, very quick summary. Natural chromosome breaks and fusions, chromosomes do break and they will fuse at the break point. We fused at the ends of the telomeres. Natural fusion, the telomeres are at the ends only of the chromosomes. Our telomeres are in the middle. And this is human chromosome number 2. Now, you might ask, what are the odds of this happening? Well, scientists typically say when the odds of something occurring are 10 to the 400th power. If you had a lottery ticket, for example, and the odds of it being a hot ticket were 10 to the 400th, that is considered scientifically to be impossible. All right, so it can't happen. So the odds of the DNA doing what we're describing right now, scientists are telling us the odds are 1 in 10 to the 600th, which means it's more than impossible. It's beyond impossible that this could have happened. And I just want to show you what 1 in 10 to the 600th looks like. There it is right there. It's 1 with a bunch of zeros after it. And if you don't have a mathematic brain, I'm going to put this another way. I love this. Sir Fred Hoyle, English astrophysicist, he said the odds of the DNA in general forming randomly and assembling things like human chromosome number 2, the odds of the DNA forming randomly are the equivalent of a tornado sweeping through a junkyard, and once the tornado exits, assembling a Boeing 747 from the scattered debris. And if you don't know what a Boeing 747 looks like, there's one right there. That's the big planes with a hump on the front. Now, we all know that's never going to happen. You're never going to assemble a Boeing 747 randomly from wind blowing through a... You won't even assemble a wing. You won't even assemble a tire from this, probably. So this is how rare this kind of fusion is. If it was the only one, you could say maybe it's a fluke. There's another one, and I don't have the slides here, but when we talk about, I'm just going to mention it now, we talk about complex speech. I'm a musician. I've been a musician long before I was a scientist. And one of the questions I asked myself back in the 1960s as a musician child of the 60s is, why don't chimpanzees sing? When we look at their genome, we share 98% of a genome with a chimpanzee. They're the closest genetic form of life to us. Why don't they sing? And the answer is a mind blower, because there is another chromosome. It's chromosome number 7. And on chromosome number 7, there are 2 little genetic codes in all primates for over 75 million years have been stable, never changed in any primates. And in humans, there's a little, just this little genetic shift where they were turned sideways. They were turned, what was the preceding became the following, and the following became the preceding in this code. And when that happened, it connected our tongue and our jaw and the muscles in our mouth to the part of our brain that allows us complex speech. It allows us to sing, and it's the reason a chimpanzee cannot sing. You'll never guess when this happened. I'll tell you right now. It happened exactly 200,000 years before present. Excuse me, 200,000 years ago, the same time chromosome number 2 underwent the fusion, the same time that we emerged as anatomically modern humans. So if it was impossible, more than impossible, for chromosome 2 to happen, what are the odds of chromosome 2 and chromosome 7 happening at precisely the same time? And there are others that we could go into. So this has put scientists in a tough place. Who or what is responsible for this? Scientists say that the timing of the fusions and the modifications, number one, 200,000 years ago, the precision with which they happened, and the result leads into what they call forbidden territory. And I love the forbidden territory, because the forbidden territory in the scientific community says these are not the product of natural evolution. They appear to be intentional. And if there is intent underlying our existence, that opens the Pandora's box in biology, in some people's beliefs, Jim. Personally, in mine, it doesn't. Because the belief has always been that it's either natural evolution or it's religion, is how this is framed. And there's no room for anything in between. I believe that we're the product. I personally believe. Now, this is where I'm going to deviate from peer-reviewed science. Everything I've shared up until this moment is peer-reviewed science. Now, my personal feeling about the peer-reviewed science, I think the evidence strongly suggests that we are the product of some kind of intervention in our past. I think that intervention has the potential for a lot of meaning. It doesn't have to be religion as we know it today, and it doesn't have to be, it's a hybrid, a hybrid kind of evolution. When scientists are looking at this and they say, well, what kind of intervention? This is the whole point. Because we don't know and we cannot know unless we free our scientists from the bonds and the shackles of the belief systems that require them to stay with the current story. So I'm going to make a distinction here. There's a huge difference between taking the information. New discoveries are being made all the time. There's a huge difference between taking those new discoveries and forcing them to fit into a predetermined story, which is what is being required in universities today. The predetermined story is Darwin's idea of evolution. So what's happening now is all of these discoveries, they're trying to force into the theory of evolution. It's like putting a square peg in a round hole. And we all know if you pound hard enough, that square peg, it'll go into that round hole, but it's never going to be a good fit. And that's where we are now. So there's a huge difference between doing that, forcing the discoveries to fit the old story, and allowing the discoveries to lead to whatever the new story is that is being told. And my purpose in sharing this information, I've written a couple of books on this, is to invite our young people who are in school right now about to dedicate their entire lives to unlocking the mystery of our origins, to invite them to free themselves from the bonds and the shackles of the false assumptions of obsolete science and follow the information where it leads, rather than following the information into the old story. Science. I support science 100%. Science has been hijacked in so many ways to support the narratives that Jim was talking about, to support the narratives so that there are ways of thinking that are imposed upon societies. This is all part of our story. So I'm just going to invite our community to think about this, because this is only one piece. This is only one piece. We've been taught that we're the product of of a cosmos, a universe that's dead and inert. We've been taught it's a product of lucky physics. We've been taught that we, within those lucky physics, are the product of lucky biology. And if we think that way, where's the specialness in the environment? Where's the specialness in nature? Or where's the specialness in us? If we're the product of lucky physics and lucky biology, it opens the door for us to view ourselves as something that can be exploited. Human body can be exploited. Life can be ours to give, and life can be ours to take when we choose. And if the world around us is simply the product of random processes, which we've been led to believe, we treat the world around us as if it also is something to be exploited and dominated. I think Rachel Carson may have said this the best. She was an early environmentalist in the 1960s. And she wrote a beautiful book. If you're not familiar with it, I'm going to invite you to check it out. It's called Silent Spring. It was her calling attention to the pesticide DDT and what it meant in our world. I read this when I was a kid, and there was one sentence or one quote that stayed with me for my entire life to this moment. And what she said is that we destroy what we don't value, and we can only value what we understand. We're destroying human life. We're destroying our planet. And there's nothing in our educational system today that gives us the reason to do otherwise. Nothing that gives us the reason to embrace the specialness, the fact that we are more than random processes. And to take this one step further, we're also taught that we are the product of a long line of competition and conflict that has led to our success as a species. Dog eat dog world is what I was told when I was a kid. Darwin said in his original manuscript, and I have a copy, and I want to be very clear, he said that we live in a world of nature's survival of the strongest. That was his language. Later, it was interpreted as survival of the fittest. It's not what Darwin said originally. And it's important because it gives us insight into his thinking. He believed that it was survival of the strongest. The new discoveries have overturned this. New discoveries now tell us that nature, the fundamental rule of nature is cooperation and what biologists call mutual aid, not competition and conflict. And we all know we see competition everywhere. So what does that mean? It means the more conflict and competition, and when I say competition, I mean violent competition, not a friendly game of chess. But this is violent competition. The more violent competition that we see in the world and the more conflict, that tells us how far we have strayed from the fundamental rule of this world that we live in, the fundamental rule of nature, of cooperation. And that informs our story. So who or what is responsible to give us the extraordinary potentials that human chromosome 2, chromosome 7, and others, they give us the abilities that we'll talk about in a future program, but I mention these, the ability to self-regulate our biology in the presence of an ever-changing world. And here's why that's important. Because when you know that you have the power to self-regulate, to take care of yourself, in the world that is changing, that change becomes much less fearful. If your sense of well-being hinges on the stability of your external world, and you're living the time we're living now, that can be very, very frightening. So our greatest mastery in the indigenous traditions is to find and accept our ability and our responsibility to awaken fully, perhaps for the first time, what our humanness really means to us. And in the presence of that humanness, we make good decisions as we build the world going forward, rather than building it out of the fear that we need technology to be healthy, or we need technology to be successful in life. They can help, and that's why they're there. But we're not slaves to that technology unless we choose to be slaves to that technology. And we're at the crossroad right now. Jim, you and I have talked about this. These are the decisions that are being made. It all comes down to our story. We live our lives, we solve our problems, choose our relationships, we heal our bodies, we develop our policies and our laws based upon our story. So our story is changing. And the question is, and this is where I'm going to close with this part, The question is simply this: do we love ourselves enough to embrace the deep truth of what the new human story is telling us about ourselves? Do we love ourselves enough to awaken those potentials in our lives? And it's through programs like this that Jim has put together and others that we're becoming aware that we have that choice. So, Jim, this was relatively brief. Thank you for the opportunity to delve a little deeper into. I could have just said there was a fusion of chromosomes, and people, would say, "Okay, yeah, big deal." But I wanted our community to know why it's such a big deal and why it's so rare. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll end the share screen unless you'd like for me to keep it up for any reason.
No, go ahead, and that'll bring us back into dialogue. Thank you so much, Greg. This has been marvelous. And obviously, the question arises in terms of intervention as to what the source of the intervention was. And that
Yeah.
takes us to the whole domain of extraterrestrials and the collective memory that humans had all over the world since time immemorial, that we have experienced the visitation of alien beings, extraterrestrial, the visitation of the gods. So I would love to just hear your thoughts, knowing that this is moving from scientific fact to interpretive meaning that we're giving to the data, and therefore it's obviously your subjectivity. But given the fact that you've studied this so deeply, how would you account for this intervention of the chromosomes in the way that you've described?
Yeah, that's a big topic, Jim. And so I'm going to reiterate. So this is my personal feeling. I've been blessed as an adult to travel the world into some of the most isolated, remote, magnificent, mysterious, beautiful places remaining in the world for 40 years now, to meet with the people, to meet with our brothers and sisters
By the way,
that we
Greg,
rarely have the opportunity.
your your video is not on. Did you turn it off because of the low capacity?
Hey, Jim, it's
I
because of the
didn't.
satellite phone. It's the lag. It's a freeze and lag, Jim.
Oh, okay. All right.
Is it
Sorry about
is
that.
it
Keep
on
going,
now?
Greg.
Is it on? Yeah,
Greg, we
is
have
it
a
on now?
freeze. It's Greg, it's freezing because of the bandwidth. So, okay.
There
Interesting,
we
but the
go.
audio is coming through okay?
The audio. So just keep going. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have interrupted. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. I apologize for that. I'm not sure what's happening here, but
Not to worry.
so I've been blessed to meet with our global family, our brothers and sisters that we rarely have the opportunity to hear from the highlands of central China and Tibet, the Tibetan monasteries and the monks and the nuns in India and Nepal, and all through the Andes of South America, the Aboriginals in Australia, the Bedouin in Africa, and more, all through the American desert Southwest. And what I have to say, Jim, is that modern science is the only story that says we're the product of a random process. Every one of the traditions, as different as they are from one another, they're all different. But one of the common themes is that they all say we are the product of an intelligent intervention and that we are part of a greater community. And when I go into the Andes of South America, for example, and towards the Bolivian border, there are communities there that have regular contact with their family, their cosmic family. When the elders are sick, the elders are brought down to a place near the water. It's by Lake Titicaca. They're brought down to a place by the water at sunset, and they're left there. And when the families come back in the morning, their elders are healed from the brothers and sisters in the sky, and they're actually viewing areas where it's so common to see these lights come from the sky to the earth and to interact. There are places for viewing down there. So the cultural story of our origin is very different from the scientific origin. So when I look at across the board, so I'm looking at culture, I'm looking at the DNA evidence, I'm looking at the archaeological evidence, I'm looking at the fossil evidence, the paleontological evidence, and now I'm an amateur archaeologist. I've been invited as a geologist to consult on an archaeological project that so far has revealed over 3,000 artifacts, 3,000 separate artifacts, all depicting the same story. And that story is human contact and human relationships with beings that are not from this world, and successful birth coming from those beings. Also, there are maps of our solar system that are more accurate than anything we had until the 20th century. But what makes it interesting is the solar system is depicted as if you were coming inbound toward the sun rather than going from our planet outbound. With such accuracy, they're showing the rings around Neptune, for example. We didn't even know Neptune had rings until late in the 20th century. So the archaeological evidence pictorially suggests that there is this relationship as well. My personal feeling is I believe we are the product of an intervention. I had the privilege of touring with Zecharia Sitchin back in the 90s before he passed. And he was a brilliant scholar of the Sumerian texts and tablets. We did not agree on the translation. And what he always believed was that humans were created as a slave species for another world. And while we may have that as an experience of our past, I firmly believe that it's not the reason we are created. And I have to, I mean, I'm using the word created. So there's another piece of this, Jim, that we didn't go into here. And it is a book that I wrote in 2004 called The God Code. And the bottom line, as a senior computer systems designer, I was well versed in what is called pattern recognition in data. And when I left the industry, I took that pattern recognition, and it coincidentally at the same time, the human genome was becoming available for the first time to the public. And through a whole series of, it's much more than I'll go into right now, unless people want more detail. What I found at that time was that human DNA, the chemical code of human DNA, has mathematic equivalents that link it to ancient alphabets. Mm-hmm. So I'll say it like this. Every alphabet ever developed without exception, cuneiform, Arabic, Sanskrit, English, Greek, Coptic, everything has always had mysterious numeric equivalents to the numbers. We never knew where they came from, or to the letters. We never knew where they came from. In the ancient science, it's called gematria, and it's not random. There are 32 rabbinical rules that apply mathematics to letters that have to be followed to the T. They were identified in the 2nd century. So put that aside, that is what it is. We describe the world through the periodic table of elements as scientists. So we're looking at hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, all those things. And there's a whole bunch of numbers that can be linked to every one of those elements. There's the atomic weight, the atomic mass, electron spin, I mean, all kinds of things. It took me 10 years to find the number in the periodic table that links to the number in the ancient alphabets. And it's the atomic mass is what it is. So knowing that, DNA, human DNA, our genome is made of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur primarily. So I could go through the layers of the genome with the computer and for every element in the DNA, replace it with the letters in the ancient or the core alphabets. And when I did that, lo and behold, there's a message. There are a number of messages intelligent messages in our DNA. But the very first message that comes out in the human DNA is a very clear message. And I'm just going to tell you what the message is. And the message literally reads as the words, God eternal within the body. The first strand of all DNA, carbon-based life, whether it's a blade of grass or a dog or a cat or a human. The first strand literally reads God eternal within the body. Now, I don't know why it reads that way. I don't know who put that there. And the word, and it works in Hebrew language, it works in Sanskrit language, it works in Arabic language, which are 3 of the 6 core or root alphabets. Cuneiform is the 4th, and there are 2 that they're no longer used. They were lost. So in what are called the core or the root alphabets of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions, all of them read the same, even though they're different alphabets. And to me, Jim, what that was, when I found that, it gave me a reason, and I think it gives us all a reason to look beyond our differences. The differences that have divided us and led to the great wars in the past. At this core level, God eternal within the body. And there's a whole story we can tell about what that means and what the other messages are and where it goes from there. But here's why this is interesting. That I published in 2004. Right after that, Japanese scientists developed the technology to store vast amounts of information in DNA, and they did it in a bacteria that had a relatively short lifespan, about 24 days. So they put huge amounts of information in this form of life, and then they allowed it to go through many generations, and then they found that the DNA was intact many generations later. And this is now being done. It's being done on a regular basis. Information is being stored in biology. Here's why that's important. If, as the evidence suggests, we're the product of an intervention, as artists, when we create something that we're proud of, the last thing we do is we sign it. We sign our sculptures, our music, our books, our paintings. Every piece of electronics in the computer has a signature on it that tells what it is. So if we are in fact the product of some intelligent intervention, I would hope that who or whatever is responsible is proud of what was created, is proud of us, that we came out well. And if we want to know who we are, if there is a message, my feeling, Jim, is that message would never be left on the pages of a book that could be burned or on a temple wall that could crumble over time, that the message would be left in the life itself. So that as long as the life exists, the message and the reminder of who we are and where we come from also exists. Now, I can't say that's scientific, but if we want to know who we are, we need look no further than every one of the 50 trillion cells in each of our bodies, God eternal within the body. We're still trying to understand what that means. That is another piece. You're asking me about an intervention. We've got the cultural evidence, the archaeological evidence, the genetic evidence, the anthropological evidence, and now we've crossed the traditional boundaries between linguistics and science and gematria and the periodic table of elements in chemistry. We've crossed the boundaries that have always separated them. And Jim, this is it. We must cross those traditional boundaries to weave our knowledge, which is awesome, into a wisdom that is more than the knowledge. We must honor, in my opinion, draw from every aspect of knowledge of the 5,000 years of recorded human history without judging it, right, wrong, good, or bad. At least consider it. Draw from that knowledge to build the wisdom that we need to move forward from the crises that we are in right now with the full knowledge of who we are and what our potential is. And in that way, we build a healthy world and we build healthy lives. And I'm not saying it's about, I don't think religion has all the answers. Science doesn't have all the answers. Spirituality doesn't have all the answers. But when you weave them together, they each fill in a piece that's lacking in the others. And if we can do that without judging and without the hurt that comes from the fear and the misunderstanding, that is where I think we open the door to the deep potential and the greatest possibilities that we know is true. And that includes our relationship to who or whatever is responsible for our existence.
Wow, Greg, this is very profound. Thank you for your illumination. I think you've kind of blown our collective minds here with the intricacy of what you're laying out, that not only are we the product of something intentional, something so sophisticated that they could engage in genetic engineering at a level that would create beings like us, but further embedded in our language, embedded in the periodic tables, embedded in the physics and the linguistics that surround us, is an intelligence and a bottom line, if you were, that eternity is in every single thing. And that truth that you're uncovering for us is, I think, the cornerstone upon which a new world can be built.
Oh, I love it. I love it when you talk that way, Jim. That's a beautiful thing to hear. I have to ask, is my image back yet, or am I with you?
Your image is back, but you're still kind of frozen, but your words are clear. And in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So the Word is what's important here, my friend.
Thank you for that. Well, Jim, so what you're saying is the whole point.
Yeah.
We will not know who we are until we free our scientists to follow the evidence rather than forcing them. Most scientists, the researchers, they're beholden to economics, to finances, to grants from companies, corporations, and they have to follow the predetermined way of thinking. I'll tell you, when I left the corporations in 1990 and I began talking about spirituality and science, I shot my credibility right there. I lost my credibility as a scientist. So I have nothing to lose by sharing what the evidence now is suggesting. And behind the scenes at conferences, many scientists come up to me and they say, we wish we could share what we found. We wish we could follow and do what you're doing, but we have families, we have careers, we need our jobs. So all of this, it can be complex, but I think it can also be very simple. I think intuitively, we all sense that we're more than we've been led to believe. Intuitively, I think we sense that we have abilities. Hollywood calls them superpowers, but they are simply abilities that have been relegated to mystics and yogis and monks and nuns in the past. But now we know that we can awaken these abilities in our living room and live fulfilling lives, much more fulfilling lives, by drawing upon these extraordinary potentials. And it's a very different way of thinking. I'll be the first to admit, this is not what I was trained to think. But it's where the evidence leads. And now we don't live in a vacuum. So when you take all of this evidence and you place it into the context of the world that we find ourselves in today, it's almost as if, Jim, the world is saying to us, I hope you enjoyed the life of the past and it was good. And now you can let that life go and let that world go, because a new world is opening up and you have a new life and a new way of living that is so much more, so much deeper, so much richer than you've been led to believe. And as we embrace these truths within us, these truths will be mirrored in the technology that we build around us. There's a whole conversation we can have about that, but we tend to build the technology based upon the way we think about ourselves and what we need. So if we A perfect example. Elon Musk now has a company called Neuralink. It's the first company with hard computer chips embedded into the human brain as a wireless interface to data systems, because the belief is that we need to have that. What's missing is that when we begin to replace our biology with technology, we have neurons that already do. They already have the potential to do what those chips are doing. We simply aren't using them. But if they're replaced by chips, they begin to atrophy. And in one generation, the next generation, your body says, well, maybe we don't need these anymore. We begin to lose elements of our humanness. And I'm not saying it's right, wrong, good, or bad, but what I am saying is we need to know who we are and what we're giving away before we give it away, because once it's gone, it's gone. And this, in our next conversation, we'll talk more about this, because I'll share what the potentials are and how to awaken them in our everyday lives based upon chromosome 2, based upon chromosome 7, and others, self-regulation. So we're at this point right now. This isn't future. We're making this decision right now. Are we going to give ourselves away to the technology, or will we allow the technology to serve us? And my friends in Silicon Valley, they say, yeah, but man, the computers, you can't beat a computer. But here's the thing. A computer chip is made of a physical structure that is limited in its capacity. They can be fast, but they can only be so fast and only work so well. Rather than wires and computer chips and chemicals, we are cell membranes and neurons in blood. And the point is that we are scalable. We don't know the full potential of what our neural capacity is, what our neurons can carry. We are scalable. We can access other dimensionalities, other states of consciousness that the computer chip simply cannot. So if we give ourselves away to that technology, we are isolated only to this narrow bandwidth of this physical world, and we lose access to, again, the very essence of our humanness. I don't think we want to do that. Most people don't even know that it's on the line right now. So that's why this is important.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Whatever our challenges are, there's the tendency to engage in some kind of geoengineering, some kind of technical fix. And every time we do that, we limit and debilitate those potentials within ourselves that could have solved the problem much more efficiently, much more abundantly, if we'd have spent the time to activate them in a way that serves the higher good. So I think that's a very important point, because I think as we take up these global challenges, the answers are going to bifurcate along the tectonic plates that you're laying out. Either a technical fix without an elevation of human consciousness, which perpetuates the problem in a different way, or really the discipline of activating human consciousness that then changes the technology we use to solve the problems.
Yeah, I agree, Jim. And I think, again, there was a time we could talk about this in the future, and that time is past.
Yes.
So we're talking about this is happening right now. It's happening now.
Right
and
now.
What I'm seeing two parallel societies that are emerging out of COVID. And I'm seeing it in my little neighborhood organic co-op, where people don't have these conversations typically, but I go and I see my neighbors, and I say, how are you and how are things? Two parallel societies. One of those societies is all in on everything because they're afraid of the world. They have been conditioned through a narrative perpetuated in the mainstream to be afraid. So they want to be saved. So they're all in on all the technology, on all the medical technology, which is wonderful if it's needed. Some people need those. I'm not against it. But for everyone, it doesn't make sense. They're all in, and then there's another society that's emerging, and these are my neighbors at the organic co-op. And what they say to me is, Greg, I don't know exactly what's happening, but it's happening too fast. We need to slow down, go back to the basics. We need to go back to the things that are important to us. How do we grow our own food? Because we can't be assured that we're going to have food in this grocery store next week. The deliveries aren't happening. How do we care for ourselves? The hospitals are full. How do we teach our kids because the schools are broken? How do we take care of ourselves in a community because we don't feel safe? So two things are happening, two parallel societies. And as humans, I think human nature is that we'll check each other out because that's what we do. And it's not going to take long. This cannot go on for a long time. Something's going to give. But I think what will happen is we're going to check each other out. And Jim, what we're going to do is we're going to say, who's happier? Who's healthier? Whose lives are more fulfilled? Whose children are more adept at dealing with the world and life? And the answer to that question is what I think ultimately is going to unify us as a society. The answer to that question, because whoever has the best answers to those questions is what everybody else is going to want. It's like when Harry met Sally. I want what she's having. And that was the famous Meg Ryan scene. So whoever is happier, healthier, more fulfilled, and healthier children that can function in society, that's where we're going to go. But we have to give people an alternative. We have to have a parallel economic system. So when the one we have now breaks, we've got something, we don't try to fix it. We've got something better. We've got to have a better social system in our communities and our families. So as the old ways break down because they're no longer sustainable, it's okay because we've now got something new. And that's why conversations like this, Jim, are important, because this is a very new and very different way of thinking about the human body, but it opens the door. And I keep alluding to this. I'm hoping that you and I can come back and have a second conversation about how to awaken these potentials in our bodies, because that changes everything when we look at a world crumbling around us, knowing that we have these abilities within us.
Thank you, Greg. You've given a powerful, inspirational start for Humanity Rising as we embark on 2022. And I think the foundation now, everyone, upon which we're going to build, both with Greg, but with others, is this central point that Greg is bringing to our collective intention. And that is, we humans are here for a purpose. We were intentionally designed to be who we are. We're embedded with the capacities of empathy and compassion and self-healing and collective imagination. And we have forgotten that. And we need to reactivate it. So over this next year, we're going to have a very deep conversations about the reimagination of the human. But we're going to be starting by turning the conventional worldview that we're being told is true literally upside down. And we're going to go from flat to round. And Greg, you've given us a round world today by, I believe, accurately and quite profoundly articulating the potential that was embedded in us intentionally at the beginning of the modern human. So thank you for that. And we look forward to having you back sometime soon on Humanity Rising. And let us just close, if there's a word of wisdom or anything, just finally you would like to say to our global community.
Well, Jim, I just want to thank you for opening the new year with this program. I'm honored. And I'm going to reiterate, the better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are to deal with whatever life brings to our doorstep. I think we've got a lot of mysterious deliveries coming to our doorstep this year, and I think it behooves us to know who we are so that we can respond in a healthy way. So thank you so much. Thank you to our community for sharing a little bit of your day with us today. And Jim, I look forward to our next.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, everyone. You're all welcome to the after chat group. You'll see the link that Stan will put up in the chat box. And then tomorrow is January 6th. And we're going to spend some time looking at the issue of the crisis of democracy in the United States, but also globally. And we're also going to take on a very, I would say, powerful and potent theme of apology and forgiveness as we look around at what we've done to the planet, what we've done to other peoples, because that's in some ways the other side of the coin for what we've discussed today, is we need to enter into the year with a deep humility, born out of an awareness that we've done a lot of damage for which we need to be apologetic and also forgiven. So we're going to go into those domains tomorrow on the second day of 2022 on Humanity Rising. But Greg, thank you. Everyone, thank you. And we'll see you here again tomorrow, same time, same station. And we'll have Greg back probably in a couple months for the next installment. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you.